Welcome to Muslim Apologetics Australia. Recently, I've done a video on Surah 434 refuting the claim that the Quran allows violence and beating towards women. Surah 434. I produced a video a few years back. I just recently produced another one showing that this interpretation of the Islamophobes are wrong, clearly debunked in the video, and we showed that the real interpretation of the actual verse. So I'll quickly go through the verse and then we'll look at a counter rebuttal, what some Islamophobe wrote, and we'll respond to that, God willing. So teaching Muslims the quickest way and effective way to refute Surah 434. The correct interpretation is how the earliest Muslims called Ibn Abbas interpreted the beating, and that is in a non-violent fashion. Now ask yourself the question, what type of beating is non-violent? The answer is a tap, like tapping lightly, like tapping a drum. Therefore, you tap your wife to get her attention after exhortation, after all avenues have been expressed. And if we go to Tafsir ibn Kathir, you can see it in the screen. As it says, fear Allah regarding women, for they are your assistants. You have the right on them that they do not allow any person whom you dislike to step on your mat. However, if they do that, you are allowed to discipline them lightly. They have a right on you that you provide them with the provision and clothes in a reasonable manner. Ibn Abbas and several others have said the ayah refers to beating that is not violent. Al-Hasan al-Basri said that means a beating that is not severe. So it is a beating that is non-violent. It's obviously a tap. I mean, you can't, the Arabic word idrabuna, they've obviously used the word beat. It does sound a little bit like, oh, what the hell? I mean, someone's getting beaten here. But it's not that type of beaten. It's the type of beating which is a tap. It's just a small little tap on the shoulder. Hey, wake up, woman. Behave yourself. Why are you being like this, and so forth? You're having a confrontation with your wife. You're tapping on the shoulder to show your seriousness, to get her attention. That's all the interpretation actually means. And as you can see, the highest scholar of eminence, Ibn Abbas, has said that this beating is non-violent. So now the Islamophobe has to try and debate with us and say, prove to us how is this beating discriminatory or abuse against women when the actual act is non-violent. Amazing, isn't it? And have a look, this ignorant fool Islamophobe called Wendy Klein says, she writes to me, she says, Mustafa, you agree that lightly tapping a woman like on a drum is acceptable? Not in my country, it's not. Even non-violent beating is not allowed. Beating someone verbally, especially for many years, causes irreparable harm. Here in a non-Sharia Australia, we have laws that prohibit any violence, especially violence against women. And she talks about taking your Sharia home. And here is a response. These silly, incoherent people, how is tapping someone on the shoulder in a non-violent way considered even unacceptable? You people have been proven wrong and clearly refuted, and you only make these silly remarks. These silly people complain about tapping, yet their own secular laws have police belting people using batons, as you can see in this screen. That's a police officer belting someone using a baton. And that's part of Australian culture. Now, don't get me wrong, folks, I'm not making any excuse for violence, but I'm merely showing that Wendy is a double-faced hypocrite when they claim that when she says even non-violent beating is not allowed in this country, when it's proven that violence is acceptable in your country and in your culture, yet you have a problem with non-violent tapping a woman? As the Quran commands, it's a non-violent tapping of a woman. Here you go, tap, tap. Listen, I'm tapping myself on the arm. That's a tap. It's not even violent. And then she tries to twist the argument and conflate it to verbal abuse. But notice the Quran doesn't say to verbally abuse your wife. So how are you even conflating both the arguments? One is, yes, I agree that domestic violence and physically violently harming a person, that can cause harm. Yes, verbally assaulting someone can cause them harm too. But to conflate that and say simply tapping a person causes physical or psychological harm, you're being completely nonsensical and silly. That's like me walking up to someone in a marketplace and tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, excuse me, you forgot your purse at the counter. Can you take that? Would you now say that is psychologically and physically or verbally assaulting that person? You are really, really completely incoherent and silly. It's interesting because just recently in the Australian media, a Muslim leader was crucified by the media for his attempts to explain Surah 434, where he actually, and his name is Keysar, who actually stated that Muslims can resort to violence using Surah 434 against women as a last resort. This was said by Keysar Trad in the Australian media. And of course, he made a mistake in his interpretation of the Quran. And the media went after him, right? They literally lynched on him. And of course, it gave us issues as a Muslim community because we had to now advise Mr. Keysar Trent to actually, correct him on his opinion on the Quran and so forth. And this is what they do. The Islamophobes, they single out a particular Muslim leader, put him in the spotlight and say, look, we were right about Surah 434. We even have a leader saying you can resort to violence. And his interview happened with Andrew Bolt on a particular show. And of course, Mr. Keysar Trad came out and apologized, and he admitted on his own Facebook page that he actually the verse. He actually made an interpretation of that. And he writes, this is Keysar Trad, he quotes, and I'm reading from his Facebook, it says, I condemn violence against women. It is never okay to hit a woman. And he acknowledges it. He says, I acknowledge my clumsy attempt to explain a verse from the Quran, and I want to categorically condemn all forms of violence, especially violence. And of course, he's from the Australian Federation of Islamic Council. So he took back his statement and he admitted he made an error on his clumsy interpretation of the Quran. Forgive him for that. They went the authority on that. And in fact, even Keysar admitted he made a mistake on the interpretation of the Quran and so forth, the Herald Sun uploaded, and let's go ahead and read that. As you can see, Trad says, Islam says beat wives only as a last resort. And as you can see, the whole article is posted here, and I'll put it as a hyperlink below this video. And what they do is, the Murdoch media, they actually quote Surah 434, but they give Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who's an international scholar's opinion on that matter. And in his opinion, the scholar cites that you should beat them lightly. But notice this is only a vague interpretation of what the scholar has said. If they ask the scholar, what does the beating of a light way mean, he obviously would have explained it according to what Tafsir Ibn Abbas would have understood it, in a non-violent fashion, like a tap. But of course, the Herald will not give you those details. I'll only quote references and pages without a clear interpretation, only a vague, brief interpretation, and not a in-depth interpretation on the matter. And this is of media propaganda and Islamic manipulation of the text and scholarly opinion. That's not how it works. And the Rupert Murdoch media runs people like Rita Panahi, who's a Irani. Most likely she claims she's a Muslim, but she's a total secularist, a complete sellout of Sharia. And she goes out barking against this particular sheikh and the verses of the Quran, which has been completely taken out of context. You know, it's funny because people like Rita Panahi, you know, these secularists, they come from a country that actually permits violence, that actually permits certain abuse or violence towards a person, and that could even be in good faith. For example, AFL sports. If you look at AFL sports, they have something called a hip and shoulder. I mean, I'm not too sure if you've actually kicked an AFL football before and played in a game in Aussie rules, but if you copped a hip and shoulder, that could really knock you out and give you some awful pain. But it's in good faith of the sport. This is a violent contact that could literally take you out of conscious. You could go into consciousness, right? Into this. So basically, they have violence. You could get, by law enforcement, you could get hit by batons. You have crowd control, security guards that twist your arms and put you in all sorts of positions to kick you out of a nightclub, for example, or during crowd control. You have physical violence accepted in secular society, right? Regardless if you're a man or a woman. And again, I'm not making excuse for violence. The Quran, again, does not have anything violence against women to abuse them. But when these people are coming to say that violence is not accepted here, first of all, Islam does not allow violence. And secondly, your own secular system has violence in there, regardless if it's sports, in security, in crowd control, police using violent batons against protesters for crowd control. That's part of your system. Of course, you will say that's justified. But then again, I'm not justifying to beat a woman in Islam. Again, that's wrong. That's not justification. But when a silly person comes out and says to me that you can't tap your wife, like just give her a tap on the shoulder, and they say that's just a problem, that's not befitting in a secular society. When your own secular society, you could get knocked out unconscious by a hip and shoulder playing Aussie rules. But they have no problem with that. I mean, these people are absolutely sick. They have no arguments, just double standards and hypocrisy. Thank you and goodbye.